Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's another legal review of a nursing case. Today, we're going to be looking at the case of DonQuenick Joppy and how she had manslaughter charges filed against her, as well as two other charges. Those were later dropped, so that is positive. But she is now suing the hospital, stating that the hospital system was incredibly racist to her, and that was part of the reason why any of this was looked into the first place, and that she was not allowed career advancement. And there's been a ton of sketchy things due to the fact that she was black and everyone else that worked there was white. So she's suing them and saying, basically, you let people be super duper racist, and that's not cool. Someone in the comments, let me know if you can hear me. If you're watching live, if you're on the replay, hello. I will attempt to have timestamps so later we can hop back and you can just like look at the specific parts that you're interested in. But this is where we are right now. Let's start with the beginning of the case. So I have a poll going over on YouTube. So I asked if anyone had heard of this case, and 67% of you said no. So this was also the case until very recently for me. I'm glad I found it because this is racism in health nursing, especially, is an absolute disaster. And this case, I feel like, highlights some of the research that we've seen and gives us a way to implement it. I've talked about racism in nursing in some of my other videos, and there's always a whole gaggle of people who are like, that's not real. And so this came up. I'm not happy that this happened to her in any way. I'm happy she's fighting back, but I'm glad that we can kind of pinpoint it and be like, hey, look, it does exist. And the more we can be aware of this, and the more we can advocate to make that change, because we really could use it. Hi, David. Hi, Carla. Awesome. You can hear me. Wonderful. David, thanks for being a member. I appreciate you. Okay, so let us start with the basics here. Okay, so we have DonQuenick Joppy. I have heard she likes going by Dawn, maybe, and maybe not including like her last name with it. So I'll just call her DonQuenick for now. So that's not trying to be, disrespectful or pretending I know everyone. It's more, I think I've heard on Twitter that that's what she likes. I'm attempting Twitter now to get information. I don't know how to use it, so send me good vibes. All right. So the basics of this situation is DonQuenick worked at a hospital, and she was working in the ICU in 2019. In 2019. Okay. Yes. 2019 was when the event happened. Charges were in 2020. In 2019, a patient came in. She was working in the ICU. It was the end of her shift, and a patient was admitted. He was elderly. I believe he was like 97. Came into the ICU, and he was in septic shock. So if you're unfamiliar, septic shock, for this gentleman started as pneumonia and a bowel. I think he had a perforated bowel. So like his gut kind of, as in small intestines or as large intestines, something popped open. That is incredibly unlikely that you're going to recover from that at any age, like especially as a older adult. So, and sepsis is when the infection goes like throughout your whole bloodstream. This is very difficult for anyone to overcome, but particularly when you are much older. So he went to the emergency room. He got put on a ventilator. And then the team kind of contacted the family and said, hey, our prognosis here is it's not very good. And so they sent him up to the ICU and made him palliative care. What that basically means is we're not going to try to treat you in order for you to get better. We're going to put you into comfort measures so that you're as comfortable as possible. There came an order for a nurse to take him off of to really put him on comfort care, take him off the ventilator, and just make him comfortable and allow the patient to pass. This was towards the end of shift change. So DonQuenick, it was like she was doing a 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. shift. So this is all happening, of course, at shift change. So she stays, and another nurse is told, hey, this I was given orders by the physician. A doctor gave the verbal order of end of life measures to another nurse who delegated the order to DonQuenick, according to, like, this is what she's saying in her lawsuit that she'll file. We'll talk about that in a minute. And this is like one odd, and I think just I'm going to reiterate, because I always trying to find teaching points within these cases, is don't take verbal orders. I think if we've learned anything as of late, it's that we shouldn't take verbal orders, right? Because that always comes back and bites people in the butt. But she took the order. I completely understand why. This is a situation where you know the patient's going to be comfort care. Let's make them comfortable. DonQuenick, at the end of her shift, she's like, "Okay, I will still stay. I will do that even though I'm pretty much done already." Calls respiratory therapy because in the hospital, if a patient is intubated, usually respiratory therapy is going to be the one that's going to come and help you do everything with the ventilator. And you'll manage secretions a lot of the times and do suctioning and stuff and maybe trach changes. However, respiratory is going to be the one to really come and help you unhook. So DonQuenick calls. She says, "Hey, we have this patient who's going on to, like, we're doing a palliative extubation, taking the tube out without expecting them to live very long." And the respiratory therapist basically says, "Hey, I'm really busy. I cannot get there right now, but here's what you can do." And so he walks her through it. She says, "Okay, great." She does all the things, shuts the ventilator down. He later stops by. There's something where, like, the breathing tube is not removed or the cuff is not deflated. So when you have let me see if I can show you. When you have a breathing tube, um, sometimes they can have a cuff at the very bottom. And what that does is it helps them not have, like, you not have secretions necessarily. So this isn't uncuffed. So this is like, if you're managing your airway well and we're not worried you're going to accidentally cough something up and swallow it down the wrong tube, right? Like swallowing liquid into your lung. So this is uncuffed. The other article that I found said that they did something with the cuff. So I don't know if the other nurse that came by then deflated the cuff or something, but something happened. There's not a lot of concrete evidence on this because the way the case was entered into court, um, that it, like, went along, it's something about how when it went to court, it was closed, so you couldn't see the details. I have the case number and the division number that I'll put in the description below in case any of you are really good at looking into that and you want to look, but I dug through all the records in Colorado and found the actual case number. I just couldn't actually access the case. So, something happened there with the extubation. The patient did end up passing away after all of these things happened, but the documentation was not put in, remember, because it was a verbal order, until after. And at that point, after the whole event, that is when a supervisor came in and said, "This whole situation, like, I don't like how it was handled." And the hospital fired DonQuenick, also blamed her for staying over after her shift because she was documenting everything that happened, even though they didn't have a nurse to take over the patient. So she was doing them a favor by staying over, and people stay over absolutely all the time in the hospital in order to finish something, especially something as sensitive as, like, a patient's passing. And they got mad at her for that. She had said that she was also a scapegoat for a ton of other things, which we'll go back and look at. But along this timeline, hospital fires her. Different articles are saying she lost her nursing license. She did not. She still has her nursing license, but she can't get a job because a year after she was fired from this job, she was criminally charged by the state of Colorado for the death of this patient. So they came at her and they said, let me find my notes, where they charged her in 2020 with manslaughter, negligent death of an at-risk person, and negligent neglect of a at-risk person. The hospital claims it was completely independent of their investigation. They say, like, "Oh, the state looked into that and that is what they decided." Their official statement was the hospital is required to file certain reports to the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. So who knows what that actually report said. I think that would be interesting to see. The Attorney General's office has access to those reports and made an independent decision to investigate the occurrence involving Miss Joppy on its own. We have the utmost respect for our partners and our patients and their families' end of life decisions, and we work hard to honor those decisions when processes designed to ensure the comfort and dignity of patients are not being followed. We take appropriate action, including reporting to the Colorado Department of Health and Environment. So that was what they were charging her with. They did end up dropping the charges as it went on. So they kind of brought all their evidence. And then the actual people who were charging her dropped it. So they made a motion to dismiss. And their reason was it was in the interest of justice. It's still on her record, right? So she was still charged with manslaughter, negligent death of an at-risk person, and neglect of an at-risk person, which isn't going to look great, right? And if anyone does a background check on you because she got fired, that's going to show up and it's going to be like, oh, I mean, that's pretty much in direct correlation with your nursing license. So the charges were dropped, but it will still show up. What now is happening is that DonQuenick Joppy, the nurse, is saying, this is some BS. And she is actually suing the healthcare system. It's going to be in trial in June. And so she is saying, throughout my entire experience at this hospital, I read an article from, let me see if I can find it. So I found a few articles, and it's hard to find to know necessarily. You're like, ooh, like, is this like a legit one or is this not a legit one? And it was saying that she was the only Black nurse on the unit, which she very much might have been. But she was saying throughout her entire experience there, she experienced a ton of super racist investigations. And she was saying the only reason this other nurse reported this entire incident and said it was sketchy was because that, of the fact that she was being discriminated against, and she had had a history of being discriminated against at this exact institution. Um, so in this one, she was a Daisy Award winning nurse for one, which if you're not in nursing, Daisy Awards are basically like, I think she had won it 3 times. That's when people within your institution or patients or families or other nurses or any staff at the hospital nominate you. It's like you have to do a lot of work to nominate people. So usually like someone who's getting Daisy Awards is usually like fairly legit. It's not like people who are just skating by that are getting these awards. She had won all of those awards. She was working in the ICU. She had never had any complaints against like any like patient, like family complaints, anything like that, except for one where a patient's family accused her of stealing a patient's credit card and using it to buy a stethoscope. And instead of the hospital being like, hey, yeah, we're going to back you up, they kicked her out of her locker and told her she couldn't go back in until they had searched it, and then thanked her for not making a big fuss about it. So that's some crap. She was skipped over for so in the ICU, there's usually like you kind of start at a certain level and there's different things that you're allowed to do. So maybe you're going to be trained for ECMO, maybe you're going to be trained for CRRT. So like there's different tiers of things that as you've been there longer, you're going to be able to do. And she wanted to get trained for some more like to be able to take care of cardiovascular patients. And the nurse told her, like her nursing manager said no, because those patients require a complex level of care and a deeper understanding of things, even though she had worked there for years and by all accounts was an excellent nurse. So things like that happen over and over and over again. And we know that racism in nursing is absolutely rampant. And so she's suing them to be like, hey, you went after me because I was like, if it was anyone else, she was saying that you wouldn't have gone after me. She is suing them. On racial discrimination. So I'll keep you posted on how that case goes. But I'm like glad that she is, because obviously like she's been able to show all of these different things that have happened to her. And we know in nursing, there are tons of studies. I'll leave them linked down in the description of this video of they've researched like if you take nurses who have the exact same educational background, who have the exact same they work at the same hospitals, they have the exact same safety records, they have literally everything that's the exact same, you will consistently see Black and Hispanic nurses not being promoted and not being given increased responsibility or jobs in the intensive care units, not being in the upper management. And it's like literally when you because in these studies they'll try to like cancel everything out. They'll be like, well, maybe it's like socioeconomic status, maybe it's this, and it will all come across as like everything is the exact same. The only differences are race, which kind of makes you think, okay, so if literally every other situation is the same, we can probably assume that there's some racism at play here, right? Where nurses are not being promoted or given different opportunities just because they're not white or because of the color of their skin. This is something that I have seen in my own practice. We had a nurse who was phenomenal. She was Black. She was the most senior, like she was applying for, there's 2 different jobs that ended up coming up on my unit. One was a supervisor role and one was an educator role. She was qualified for both of them. And she had about a decade of experience on everyone else that applied. And she was not given the job. And per the words of the people that were not hiring her, was she was too loud and she wasn't a good fit for the role because she was too loud. So, this is something that happens all the time. I think we need to discuss it because if the only people who are discussing it are the people who are affected by it, that's not very helpful. So, I admit I am not like the knower of all things on this topic. I am not affected by it, but I feel like if we all talk about it and hopefully make conscious efforts to fight back on that and talk on it, and then when we see it and then be the people to invite other people into the circle if we're in the circle, we can maybe change that. So, that is this case in a nutshell. It's horrible. Now, she, like, can't get a job because basically, obviously, if you're a nurse and anyone goes back to look at your record and they're like, "Why have you been charged with manslaughter?" So that is horrible. I'm gonna leave a link down below too of where you can, like, give financial support to her if you're interested in doing that. And we're also just gonna follow the case because I hope that I believe it is in June. Let me see if I where in my notes I took that. My notes were on I took them on a very caffeinated day and they're all over the place. Okay, so the case, I leave the case number in the description below. I if you know if anyone has access to legal things where I can like log in and look at lawsuits, you have to like sign up for them and they're incredibly expensive. But I will leave the case number down below if you happen to have access to those things and would like to look it up. I know the case number, it's Joppy versus Healthcare Health One LLC et al. And the court date is July. Ooh, that was a trip there. July 6th, 2022. In the Colorado District Court is a federal lawsuit on the civil rights employment. Um, and her exact claim is claims her colleagues at the medical center of Aurora discriminated against her by humiliating her, criticizing her in ways they did not criticize her white peers, and denying her opportunities for growth, all of which she has proof for. Um, and so that is what we have here. If you have any comments, questions, I am, as always, I like discussing these things. That's why I wanted to do this one live, mostly because I welcome any conversation, anything that would actually be helpful. If you have other things where you're like, hey, this would actually be more helpful, like as a tangible way to fix this, anything that anyone wishes anyone knew. And just thoughts. If you've seen this, if you've heard this, I'm going to go back and check my comments for a brief moment here. And I appreciate you being here. I was supposed to run my intro at some point, but I just started talking and then I kept going. I just never stopped. Um, yes, Jeffrey, a verbal order to be removed from event. I also thought that was bold, but it sounded like from the accounts that I've read, I'm really annoyed. I like to try to find the primary sources so that I can really go through the either the CMS report or what exactly happened. However, due to there was some fancy lawyer words that I don't know, it was not an open document. And so I couldn't actually go and see the one, probably be like the one that the hospital had actually filed. But yeah, don't ever follow a verbal order to remove someone from event. That seems, I know she was trying to do it to be helpful because the patient was probably suffering, but that seems not good. Mama Nurse. Hi, Mama Nurse. Wonderful person to follow. Mama Nurse. Anything she says, chat. You should just agree with and take to heart. I didn't hear it myself or I didn't see it in charting. I'm not doing it. That is a very wise choice. What about the meds that go along with extubation? There, that should never be a verbal order. Yes. So as we have seen with yes, as we have seen with like the Dr. Husel case, if you want to see on that, verbal orders surrounding anything surrounding end of life care. I'm not a huge fan of verbal orders in any case, but that especially seems like people are going to come back and fight you on it. If You'll have to let me know though. So I have never had a situation where I got a verbal order for end of life meds. I have heard that sometimes it happens in the ICU surrounding extubation. So if you work in the ICU or you've worked in the ICU, let me know. All of my, I've had quite a lot of care, comfort care patients, so like end of life, but they've all been on either step down or none of them have been intubated. Have any of them been intubated? No, none of them have been intubated. Um, M said outpatient RN here. If we didn't take verbal orders, we wouldn't have jobs. So outpatient, I think, is very different, which let me see where, if you say where you work. Um, Provider cosigns on the back end. She works in outpatient urgent care. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So it's not quite as critical, and not like outpatient. We're not talking end of life care. And yes, in urgent cares, it's very, very common to just be like, "Hey, go give the person in room 4 this much ibuprofen. Can you also draw up this for me? And I need you to, go pull up some lidocaine. Da, 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 we're going to go do stitches or whatever." Everything in urgent care is like verbal order city, and then all of a sudden on the back end, you're like huddling back together and you're like, hey, let's write these orders in again. However, since it's urgent care, it's usually less life threatening. So it's like a tiny bit different. Apostle Shelley says verbal orders. Ugh, I agree. No one, let's not do verbal orders anymore, friends. Let's just, yeah, Nurse Scott, too loud. I just can't. That was literally like I this woman ended up, the one that I worked with who got denied the jobs because she was too loud. She ended up going on and doing phenomenal things at the job that she is at now, where they actually appreciate her. But this is, yeah, I was like, are you freaking kidding me? Jeffrey O says charge nurse brought to the bedside to witness this. No, it sounds like the charge nurse wasn't there. The order was given to someone else. From the documentation, it looked like a hectic mess. Like no one could take this patient when they went up to the floor. There weren't enough nurses, so this kind of got pushed on her even though she was about to leave and she already had an assignment. So it sounded like there was just a whole hot mess happening. She was like, I'm going to do these people a favor by taking this patient. And it obviously came back and bit her in the butt. So that totally sucks because she, I think, was just trying to help. But yeah, nobody. Sounds like this entire thing was a mess because then respiratory didn't have time to stop by. And then so they were giving her orders over the phone, like telling her how to take someone off a vent. Don't do that either, friends. Just if someone is like verbally talking you through how to take someone off the vent, be like, it's going to be totally fine. I'm just going to wait till you're here. Like, I'm just going to, we're going to wait a moment until you can be here. Um, the whole situation mess. I know hospitals operate in a mess all the time, and I don't think she was being malicious. I think she was trying to help, but just don't put yourself in these situations. Totally, totally separate from what is happening. It is Jeffrey O said verbal orders for end of life measures different from verbal orders for vasopressor adjustments, respiratory therapy not present, and giving instructions via phone for end of life measure. Yeah, the whole situation does not sound overly, it's a mess. And I think that's what she's saying is like the situation was a mess and you wouldn't have come after people. Like it wasn't probably like it wasn't as perfect as she would have wanted it. But most of the time I think the hospital would have been like, oh, well, like we tried. And so DonQuenick is saying like, hey, you wouldn't have come after me if it was literally anyone else that worked here, but I'm Black. So obviously you're looking into it and like trying to find, it sounds to me like they're trying to find reasons to get rid of her. You know what I mean? Um, Allegedly. I'm just going to start saying allegedly everywhere because I hope that protects me. Thanks for shining a light on this subject. Of course, I'm sorry that it's a situation that even needs to have light shown on it, but I'm hoping we can fix it. Chat Murphy says, I'm in aviation. I never do anything on verbal ever. Why do you guys allow that? Because it's how it's been forever. And we need to be more like you in the aviation world. It's how it's been forever. We've always taken verbal orders because things are chaos and like a lot of the times like people are like, oh, I can't get to a computer and you have to wait so long. And so like personally, I've taken a lot of verbal orders because I want my patients to be comfortable. So I'm like, hey, the resident's in the middle, the resident has 8 billion patients. I know that they're not going to get to the computer to order my patient the medicine that they need for a little while. So they give me the verbal order and I say, okay, I'm just going to go give this because I don't want to have to wait for my patient to sit here who's suffering so that I can go and do this thing. Now I would not do that. If I was working as a bedside nurse, I would do it totally differently, and I would wait. But that's why I think a lot of times it's compassion. You're like, hey, I feel really bad for you. I want to be able to get you relief as soon as possible. I know you're not going to enter the order because you're like overwhelmed. The poor resident's probably sobbing in the closet with like the entire job they have to do. And Yeah, or they're in a code. Like there's a million reasons why a provider can't put an order in right away. If they're in the middle of running a code or a rapid response, they're not going to be able to put the order in. So how long is it going to be that your patient's waiting there? So that's part of the reason why. If you guys have other reasons why, then for sure let me know. But I know that's why I used to take verbal orders all the time. Mama nurse says trauma surgical ICU nurse here, and we talk about it verbally. Um, but if it's for comfort measures, there are always meds to keep them comfortable. I would hope there would be meds. I don't know if there were meds given in this situation. That's another thing that like I hope would have been in the report. I think that like I don't know why also they investigated it. Was it because there was no order, like the order came in later? Was it just that they were trying to like target here? All of that's kind of gray area here, and I could not find it anywhere. The reporting on this was terrible. The which one was it? The Denver Post had the best reporting. Um, Nursing Scrubs Mag, that one had a lot of like known factual issues. There was one in Yahoo that had a lot of other factual issues because she never had her nursing license revoked. So it's just hard to find like a primary sources on this one, which is difficult. Bunny Sue said in my CVICU cardiovascular intensive care unit, in case you aren't a user of all the abbreviations, we get many, many verbal orders. Yeah. Um, I bet you do. Let us do, can I figure out how to, okay, end a poll. Let's do another poll. Oh, will it let me do another poll? Oh, it might not. Okay, good. It will. How Oh, I think the answers I was gonna ask an open-ended question, and it doesn't want me to do that. Was do you often let's do, have you ever received verbal orders for end of life care? All right, new poll on the YouTubes. New poll. Um, on the last one, what was it? 92. If you're watching this later, 90% of people had not heard of the case. I had honestly not heard about it until very recently later. Pat Mac RN and Sarah are on Instagram. I'll leave their stuff below. Um, they had they were posting about it, which I was very, very grateful for. Also, if you guys ever find anything that you want me to cover and talk about, I don't my Instagram and I'm not gonna lie, my Instagram and TikTok have a lot of crochet on them. Okay. So I don't come across a lot of things. And as we've discussed, I don't know how to Twitter. So if there's ever something where you're like, oh, this would be an interesting thing that you want more information on, I'm happy to research it. I am happy to look into things, but just send them to me either on Instagram or on TikTok. I will leave that's my handle in the comments for both, or send me an email, or I'll leave a comment on YouTube. Let me know. And I'm happy. I am interested in covering, like getting into topics like this if you guys are interested in hearing about them. But I don't always know what the topics are because my own Instagram is filled with chickens and crochet. So makes it a little hard. A mom nurse says if we're doing a routine extubation, there are trials we do prior to extubation to make sure the patient will be successful. This may not have any orders in place as far as meds, but there should be. Okay, so like little practice things to kind of see where it's technically off the books because it's not. But there's an order for the actual extubation itself. Yeah, just wait for your orders. That's what I would do. What can people, Jax Runner says, what can people do to fight racism in the workplace? I think the first thing is to talk about it and to not join in, at least from my perspective, to bring it up when you are in a position of power and call it out when you see it, which can be uncomfortable, but usually does turn things around like a little bit. Um, you know, saying just being there for people too. I have been in different, I have seen situations where you can just stand up for people or really counter them and be like, why would you think that? Or like, don't say that to me. Or like, don't, I don't tolerate that kind of conversation. ending the conversation or saying like, why would you even think that? Turning it back on people can sometimes be helpful. Bringing people into the circle too can be really helpful because certain people aren't going to get invited into certain conversations, if you know what I mean. And so if you go out and you're bringing people into the conversation, you are, when opportunities, just making sure if you're sitting in a room and everyone else around you and like looks exactly like you, that's a problem, right? So you're generally going to want to be like, what other voices can we bring into this if you have any power in the situation? Recommending people who you're like, hey, I think you'd be really good for this. Encouraging other people to join committees, to be part of it. Because even if, like, I think sometimes I've encountered situations where people weren't even going to try to be on things because they were like, oh, that's just like not something that they didn't think people would be interested in hearing about like them. So it's like, oh, I'll join it with you. Let's go. I think your voice is important to be heard. And again, this is something where I I am obviously not, this hasn't affected me like as a white lady in my 30s. You know what I mean? So if any of you have anything, this has just been something that I have seen that has been helpful. If you have experienced discrimination, racism in your workplace, if there's anything that you have found like you wish your white peers would do, please let me know, and we'll highlight it here. But I think really just talking about it and calling it out rather than brushing it under the rug. I experienced this a lot in North Carolina, um, and where and really just kind of abruptly stopping the conversation and letting it be known that you're not going to be someone that they're going to have that conversation with. There was a whole lot of racism where I lived in North Carolina, and usually flipping it back and be like, why would you think that? Either kind of made people be like, oh, or just being like, no, like, I don't, that's not a conversation that I am willing to, and like, I'm entertaining here. Um, Let me see. You should consider doing commentary live during the trial. It is a federal case. So it's a federal lawsuit. I thought about it. I totally would. But it is a federal lawsuit, and federal cases are closed to cameras. So that I would have to go out for it. And I am not. One day, if my channel is gigantic and I'm making all the money, I will fly out to court cases for healthcare things and I will cover them. But you know, Mama Nurse also was pointing out that when it comes to the types of patients that you receive in critical care, she has seen a difference regarding the race topic. And I have heard that from many nurses as well, that, they're given very different patients. It's like, when you go in and you get your assignments and you're like, why you can, like, if the person doesn't like you, they're going to give you a crappy assignment. You're going to get patients that are not going to be the ones that everyone on the unit wants. Let's see here. What was, yes, CYA until the cover your ask, wait until the RT is at bedside. I always coordinate with the RT. If they're not ready, I'm waiting until they are. Yeah. I mean, I just wouldn't, guys, that's, I think, a really important take home from all of this is just, no verbal orders. Don't wait for verbal orders. And goodness gracious, wait until respiratory therapy. Like, don't, if someone's like, oh, well, I can't do that with you, but I'll walk you through it. Be like, no, I'll wait. I'll wait until you can be here with me. That's just going to be a lot safer because, right, Jeffrey's right. I mean, where was the patient going? What was the hurry? Exactly. Racism is alive and well for sure. Sad. It is incredibly sad. In aviation, you are sitting in a cockpit where your customers can't interrupt you. It's way different. I think we all went into the wrong field, guys. Maybe that's why you work in the ICU, because your patients can't really talk to you. Is that why? That's why I didn't work in the ICU, was because I couldn't talk to my patients. I was pretty sure that I was going to work in the ICU up in nursing school. And then right at the end, during your preceptorship, I was like, everyone is unconscious and I don't like this. And my preceptor was like, yeah, that's the whole point. And I was like, oh, I think we need to go in a different direction. I was going to work in the PICU, and then I realized I want my children to be up and laughing and running down the halls with like 8 million chest tubes, and I'm like having heart palpitations because they're going to rip one out. But I want that. I don't want them to be asleep. Carla Barrick says, I work in the legal field. No written documentation. It didn't happen legally. You know that from your valuable legal fights commentary. Yes, yes. Also, if you guys are following the Johnny Depp trial, I every now and then pop into Legal Bites stream. If that's where you found me, hello, welcome. Very different content here, but oh, I am probably not as nice. I'm not as nice as Alita either. She's just like the sweetest human ever. But yes, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So wait till it's documented. Did she, Ishmish Berry said, did she document that it was a verbal order and read back? So she didn't even get the verbal order. The verbal order was given to another nurse who delegated it to DonQuenick. So that's even like, yikes, yikes. Yikes, yikes. Sherry said, so I don't know. And also, I can't access the case because it's like hidden somewhere. I forget what the wording was. Let me see if I can find it in my notes of why we can't open it. But there was something in it that was like charges every year. No, 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 not that. Lawsuit claims. Choppy and okay, I can't find it. There was something weird about the case. Then that was why we couldn't end up looking at the initial case. And I can't see the one that she's filing against the healthcare system because I don't want to pay for it. Carla, I will put the oh, Carla, if you're a legal person, you might be able to find it. Carla, I'm going to put the case number in the description below because it has oodles of numbers, but I will put it in the description below at the end of the video. Actually, I'll just put it in here really quick. So the case number, everyone bear with me. It's 1, 2, 2. Like such a detective finding this, and this is probably someone who knows what they're doing could find in literally 3 seconds. Joppy versus HCA Health One LLC et al. I was very proud of myself. And the case is on 7/6/22. Okay. Mama nurse said, yes, I believe she said the order was given to another nurse and stayed over to complete the order. That is true. Hello, Sophia. Thank you for also being a channel member. I appreciate you. Carla said, or if you have to take any verbal orders, make sure the trusted colleague witnesses it all. Yes, it sounds like she didn't have very many trusted colleagues, which is, I think, part of the problem here. Because yikes, it sounds like everyone kept throwing her under the bus for like literally everything. Chat Murphy says, I know aviation is different. The problem in aviation is very paperwork heavy. And when an airplane crashes, that paperwork is the only thing that keeps you out of jail. Maybe think like that. Yeah, very true. I mean, that's kind of the same in nursing though, right? Because what you documented is literally the only thing that keeps you out of jail. We kind of saw that with, recently with the Redonda Vaught trial, which her sentencing was a few days ago. I have a video on it. She got, if you want to see the results of that, but she did not have any documentation because her charge nurse told her not to document. So she had to go on just what her story was, which ended up leading her getting charged. And then we've saw in like Christine Gainey's case, like she incorrectly charted. So then she got in trouble for that. So charting, yes, chart well, chart to CYA, and yes, please chart. Nurse Scott, I feel like verbal orders can work in the ER. We work with the same docs every day. They know that we have to sign the VOs and we have to enter them correctly to keep that trust. Yeah. So I think in a more hectic situation like the ER, I'm sure in the ICUs, you work with the same people all the time. The situations are often the same. The treatment is going to be the same. And as long as it's a trusted situation where you can powwow later. I mean, we did that all the time on my floor too. We would have, a kid's having a seizure. We know what we're going to do. We're going to pull the things. We're going to do the whole RRT. And then later we'll go back and actually, you'll sit with the resident literally, and they'll be like, hey, what did you order? And they'll write orders for it for you. I don't know if I would do that anymore though, to be honest. Like that culture is just not the same anymore after all of these legal things, in my opinion. Mama nurse says, yes, we have to talk about it. As a Black nurse who usually does climb the ladder, the Black nurses talk about it, but I don't think the other races talk about it. Yeah. And that's, I think the big problem is it's something that like you if it's only people that are being affected by it that are talking about it, there's no one to like pull people out of the situation. And like mama nurse, I think you're very assertive and you're going to like you've done awesome things with your career. And I'm sure you've probably had to work way harder, than I would have to, to be in the exact same situation. And I think that's where we can really make things like, let's just try to level the playing field here, people. Like, for goodness sakes, it is 2022. I almost said 2023. Woo. You should consider, oh, we did that one. Nurse Scott, do you want to open the can of worms that is reverse sexism in nursing against dudes? I would be happy to open that can of worms because I think that is also just a hot mess. But I know nothing about that, like truly nothing about how that goes because I worked in peds. There were not a lot of dudes. When I worked med surg, there were some dudes, but they all ran away very quickly. Carla said white colleagues need to be strong allies for Black or other people of color nurses. There's a strength in numbers for management to know that behavior will not be tolerated for sure. When you aren't gossiping about it, when you're not letting it happen, when you're saying, hey, why didn't why is this person being called out for this? Being there sometimes too can just be helpful. I have seen situations like in North Carolina. I don't think I'm like the perfect person for this, but there were situations where my MA, we had two MAs, they're both Black, and sometimes patients would like accuse them of weird things or would ask them weird questions. And I would just stand there and kind of let them know I was like present for the situation. You know what I mean? And that almost was helpful too, because then you could kind of just be like, oh, like, why did you ask them that? It would just like weird situations where they would get wild accusations and kind of just standing there and being like, yeah, are you going to really ask that? Like when I'm standing here to like giving backup, you know what I mean? But talk about it. Eric Hagen said lots of trust lost in doctors after the pandemic, taking orders, giving Ren Decimir, then ventilating. Okay. I was like, oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, the pandemic has just that's done a number on everything. Yeah. If you're a pilot, you're in charge, like the MD. Sadly, nurses or the flight attendants, they don't take our advice or suggestions. Oh dear. Nurses, I like to think of it as a team effort, right? I think there has to be mutual respect between the pilot and the flight attendants, just like there needs to be a mutual respect between nurses and healthcare providers where you both value each other's feedback because I guess in a lot of ways that's similar. Like, you're as a nurse, you're the one watching them. You're spending most of the time with them, right? You're not necessarily charting the way that the healthcare plan goes entirely. Your input is always appreciated, but there needs to be communication there. There needs to be mutual respect where you're like, yes, my eyes are not on the patient all the time. You're with them all the time as a nurse. So like, please tell me, and then take that feedback like well, and then like be able to talk about it. I think that would create a nice cohesive situation. At least that's my understanding. Yes. Did you just call us dudes? Just kidding. Yes, I call everybody dudes. Growing up in California, everyone was dude. It is a habit that I honestly have not put much effort into breaking, but pretty much everyone is dude. Girls, boys, adults, children. Hey, my dude. Everyone, all the time. Southern California upbringing. Gladys Happy said, thanks for shedding a light on this. I worked as a nurse for 20 years with a MSN, lots of ICUs, dialysis, education, management experience, and had to fight so much harder to get leadership roles. I'm sure you did. I don't doubt that for 1 minute. I also bet you were phenomenal. And I'm really glad that you did that and showed everybody else in that situation, you know what I mean? Like, hey, look at what I'm trying not to swear. I was going to swear. Look at how cool I am. You can do it too. So that's awesome. Uh, David, future dude nurse here. We need our dude nurses. I think dude nurses, they are very, very helpful to the vibe of things, but dude nurses, male nurses are also incredibly helpful for your male patients when, um, just had a lot of situations where, especially with like go into peds, okay? Like we need some of you to go into peds because there are like teenage boys who need someone who like just desperately want someone to be someone that they can kind of see themselves into, just to confide things in. Same with young men who are patients, usually older men could care less if you're, you know, your gender. But you have such an important role to play in so many people's lives. Um, and I just want you to know that. So go dude nurses and Nurse Scott. I'm always down to talk about it. I need to, I don't know anything about the situation you're probably in. Hello, who said Kate? How are you? Peds is my dream for now. It's the best. Pediatrics is absolutely the best, David. Do that. You'll be happy. You'll be very, very happy. Gladys says, as an FNP, BC, a year and a half growth within 21 years of experience of specialty units, a new PA out of school with no experience had the nerve to write a false evaluation of me on one day on the job. Are you kidding me? So this is just another example of racism in action in healthcare. Um, you'll have Gladys, who has 21 years of experience as a nurse, and then a PA with no experience. Was like, oh, let me evaluate you. Like, I constantly had just as different situations, nurse practitioner students when I was in primary care precepting people. I had one woman who was, she was, I forget what kind, she wore a hijab. And she was, everyone, like people would say they were afraid to go into the room with her. Um, like horrible, horrible things. I had a black nurse practitioner student, and people constantly asked me if they were um, like the MA. They're like, "Oh, you're MA." I'm like, "Nope, that's my nurse practitioner student. Like, she's gonna have her doctorate in like 3 months." And they would be like, "Wow, like good for her." Like as if this was some, wild thing. Wow, like oh, the things that they heard in those situations. Hello, Nurse Gaines was appalling. So that's why we're talking about this, so that hopefully this happens a little bit less and less. Um, let me see. Mama Nurse said she worked on a unit where you knew the doctors trusted you when they would start letting you put in verbal orders. Yeah, that happened a lot too. I put your orders in. Will you just sign them? Yep. Um, Chat Murphy says, and I still won't take a verbal order. Even when I was 19-year-old in the Navy working on airplanes for the first time, I never did verbal. I write it down and make my supervisor sign it before I do it. I think that's a really good rule, and we should probably all follow it. David just got accepted into a program this week. That's excellent. Congratulations. Also, don't let I know the internet for nursing right now is very yikes. So just like turn it off, like just turn your internet off when you need to, because it didn't always, it was all, it's always been like rough, but it hasn't always been like horrific. And I think it's going to come around. I think we're seeing a lot more people call things out when they see it. Nursing in general, like I sound like ancient when I say like the new generation of nurses, but it's true. Like the new generation of nurses are not taking crap. They're like, no, you're not going to treat me like that. Um, and I really think it's going to change. So don't take a crappy job. Okay. Don't take a crappy job. That's going to help you a lot. Um, I have a few videos on how not to take a crappy job. But if you have any questions, you can message me too. But it's going to be fine. I want you to be excited and know that it's not all going to be insane. And Chat Murphy, thank you for the super chat. Thanks for the interaction. Hopefully, the nursing industry can get this figured out. And good luck. Why, thank you. I appreciate it. Who said, Kate, I'm in Los Angeles, a diverse city, and I still see racism in healthcare. I am absolutely sure. Like, it's insane. Um, it is everywhere. It is not good, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to call it out when we see it. We're going to bring people into our circle, if we have any power in it, and we're going to fix it. Okay, we're going to try to fix it. Most of it is breaking into the super crappy. I don't know, like, I want to think that as the generation of nurses who are just kind of like old, cranky, like the old cranky ladies, if we're being real, once they get out, that it'll get better. Um, but we also have to be the change that keeps showing up in it to make it better. Felicia said, just joining. What did I miss? We were talking about the DonQuenick Joppy, the nurse who was charged with a whole bunch of yucky things: manslaughter, negligent death of a patient at risk person, neglect of an at risk person, and was had a whole bunch of just like a slew of super racially charged things against her at her hospital. Charges got dropped, however, and now she's suing the hospital saying, like, hey, you were a crappy place to work and you were racist as heck against me. And we're going to talk about it. So we were talking kind of about that, what we can do to make healthcare a little bit less racist. And just kind of then going off on our usual side tangents. Um, I'm just happy, David said, I'm just happy to have nurses like you and these commenters to help me make a change. So hopefully it won't be so toxic when I start. At least I'll have some knowledge to battle this stuff as well. For sure. For sure. And for real, like if you just need to like piece out of nursing YouTube and social media, sometimes I think that's very helpful in situations like this where you're just like, I don't want to do that. Like if you need a mental health break from it. Um, Alicia Regeller said, I have a question about transgender nurses. Have you seen medical staff treat trans nurses poorly? Probably my biggest worry about becoming a nurse. So I have not. I truthfully, to my knowledge, have not worked with a transgender nurse, but to my knowledge, you know what I mean? Like if they weren't out and I just didn't know, that would be fine. I I know it's not the same. I think it depends on the culture of your hospital. The hospital that I worked on was very LGBTQ friendly, very, at least in my experience. Granted, that was in pediatrics for most of the time. And so, when our very flamboyant PICU nurses like came through, like everybody just was obsessed with them. But and then we had a lot of, like, I would say there were a lot of people who were out who were lesbian, gay, bi, but I don't know if I worked with anybody that was trans. That was at least out. So I think it'll totally depend on the culture of the unit and the hospital. If you find a good hospital that is accepting of people who they are, you're going to know this by people are allowed to have piercings. Their hair might be a fun color. They have like they don't all look exactly the same. Like hospitals that let you be a little bit more yourself, by letting you maybe show your tattoos, by letting you have a nose ring, you have a little bit of a purple hair. When you're wandering around those campuses, that would be, I think, a place that would be much more welcoming, and just not like total scumbag, rude douchebags. So that would be the vibe I would go for. That was a thing that I wanted in a healthcare facility, was you were going to let me be like myself, and I'm not angel nurse. Like we're not going to have any we're not going to have any of that. And then the patients, in terms of like patients saying anything, patients are always going to find something that they don't like about you, especially if you are um, any type of minority in any way. And I think the thing with that is, like, if they're saying that about you, you don't want them to be your patient anyway. They're going to be super critical of you the whole time. They don't even know you. So they're making a decision based on their own stereotypes and prejudices. So it has nothing to do with you personally. And that's something I always told all of my new nurses was, if they are immediately upon seeing you being like, I don't want that person as my nurse, that's a them problem. That's not a you problem. You just dodged the biggest bullet, my friend. So, yes, it is hurtful and it's rude of them to do, like, that's very prejudiced. But whenever people immediately, like, when they fired me as their nurse, I was like, bye. Like, I never got personally sad. People were always like, oh my gosh. Like when people yelled at me, I was just like, don't yell at me. And I got fired a lot because I wouldn't let my patients scream at me. But friend, you're dodging a bullet. When people don't want you to be their nurse, that's probably not the type of patient that you want to have anyway. Um, Natosh, oh, someone said, oh, who said Kate? I've actually worked at institutions that employ transgender nurses here in LA. Patients never said zip. A fellow nurse tried to start a conversation about it and I shut them down. Excellent. This is an excellent example of if you don't tolerate that type of crappy talk, whether it's about people who are in the LGBTQ community, people who are black, people who are anybody if you do not tolerate those conversations, they're not going to spread, right? Because if you allow the conversation, that person's also probably going to go over and talk to, they talk to Kate, but like, and Kate, and so then Sarah, and then Mark, like they're going to go and spread it. But if Kate shuts them down and she's like, we're not entertaining this conversation. Susan over here, who started this, she's going to be much less likely to like branch out, because she just got shut down and that's embarrassing. She was trying to be a douchebag and she got called out for it. So good example of how to just like stop things in their track where they are. Um, and Bo said, a hospital's racist when the white friends warn you. Oh, geez. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Mama nurse said there was a transgender nurse in the ER when I worked in the ICU. I never seen anyone be mean or disrespectful, but I've only seen them for brief moments. Yeah. So if anyone knows more of how that, like, if you have any experience with that, I think it's all about the type of work, type of unit that you work on. Um, Let me see. Felicia said, with everything going on today, everyone should be supporting nurses. As a nurse, when I see stuff like this, it's so disheartening. For sure. For sure. That's why I'm trying to talk about it, just to like raise awareness on it and be like, hey, this is happening. And hopefully, like, just make people, like 90% of people had no idea that this was even a thing, just to raise a little bit of awareness on it so that we can actually do something and fix it. So, in our poll, have you received verbal orders for end of life care? 80% of you said no, 20% of you said yes. So, that is interesting. I've never received verbal orders for end of life. Nurse K said, we as nurses have to have each other's backs. This is the freaking truth. Let me see. I'm glad she's standing up for herself. Yes, I am super glad that DonQuenick is filing this lawsuit. Like, good for freaking you. We know, and I think I'm glad she's doing it. It takes immense, I'll leave her link in the description below. It takes a lot of money to do lawsuits like this. So if you want to send her any financial anything, um, you can link in the link below. It takes a lot of money to file lawsuits like this. So I think that's why we don't see them more, because it's incredibly expensive. But I hope we do, because this is just supporting all the research that we know that healthcare is super duper duper racist, not only in its patient outcomes, but within the people that work in it. And it's like I see a lot of people fighting back to it and they're like, oh, well, like that's like a one-off like thing. I'm like, no, the studies are like replicatable. And the more we see lawsuits like this, the more it sets precedents. And I hope it kind of spreads to other hospitals You're right. So I lost internet, if you can hear me. So we're probably going to wrap this one up right now because I'm tethered to my phone and it is very, very slow. So I don't think it's going to work very well. So let me mute myself on there. So lost internet. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. Thank you, everybody who expressed their own experiences. I hope that if we just keep talking about this, that it is something that, oh, back but choppy. I know. Let me see. I disconnected in the middle of a patient call. Yeah, my internet is crappy right now because it's my phone. Thank you, Carla, for your help. Carla's going to help me get legal documents. I appreciate you. I appreciate everybody that joined the conversation. I'll keep you updated on how this trial ends up going. And yeah, I'll see you later when my internet decides that it's going to actually work. Someone probably cut through an electrical cord. My neighbor's digging holes, trying to get like a trench going, and I'm almost positive he probably just chopped through it. All right. Bye, friends. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. You are wonderful. You are valuable. You are enough. Oh, yep. Sorry. I was just listening to they're swearing outside. So I think that's probably what's happening. You are not alone and you can do hard things. Bye, friends.